The 11 o'clock was running 4 minutes late. Jade knew because she'd checked the schedule between Mrs. Fortuna's ankle wrap and the foam roller demonstration she'd had to do twice because the guy wasn't listening the first time. 4 minutes wasn't a problem. 4 minutes was recoverable. "The next one's here," Danny said from the doorway. The receptionist had a specific tone she used when something unusual was happening, and she hadn't decided yet if it was a problem. This was that tone. He brought some people. Jade didn't look up from the intake notes. How many? 3, maybe 4. One of them has a headset. Send him in, just him. He's Danny. Danny went. Jade heard them before she saw them. Not loud, just present. The way a group of people who are used to taking up space are present. She heard the waiting room go a little quiet, the way waiting rooms do when someone notable walks in, and she heard the low murmur of someone giving instructions near the front desk. And then she heard Danny's voice, polite and firm, and then footsteps. One pair. He came through the door with the kind of ease that takes years to build, shoulders relaxed, half a smile already in place, the look of a man who has walked into rooms his whole life and found them ready for him. Jade was writing in the chart. She finished the sentence. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "have a seat on the table." He did. She heard the paper cover crinkle. She pulled the rolling stool to the foot of the exam table, set the chart on her knee and looked at him for the first time. He was waiting to be recognized. Not obviously, he wasn't performing it, but it was there, the slight readiness, the habit. The pause before the other person in the room does the thing people do. She clicked her pen. "When did the pain start waking you up at night?" A beat. "About 6 weeks ago, post-surgery." "Before the surgery." He blinked. "I had the surgery because I read the surgical report." She turned a page in the chart without looking away from him. The repair was clean. Textbook ACL reconstruction. Dr. Reyes did good work. "I'm asking about before. How long were you playing on it before the diagnosis?" He was quiet for a second. Not defensive, more like recalibrating. "Couple months, maybe." "Okay." She wrote something. "Take your shoes off, please." Here's what most people don't know about ACL rehabilitation. The surgery is the easy part. Reconstructing the ligament takes 45 minutes under general anesthesia. Getting the neuromuscular system to trust the new structure, to stop bracing, to stop compensating, to actually load the joint properly, that takes months. That's the real work, and you can see the compensation patterns in the way someone sits, stands, shifts weight. You don't have to ask. The body tells you. Jade took his knee in both hands and started with passive range of motion. Slow, methodical, moving the joint through its full arc while he sat still. She felt where it stopped, felt where the tissue was guarding, felt the asymmetry between what the surgical report said and what the knee was actually doing at 6 weeks out. She didn't look up. "You've been compensating for longer than 6 weeks." He stopped breathing for a second. She felt it, the stillness that moved through the rest of him. "What does that mean?" His voice was careful now, different than it had been 30 seconds ago. "It means your body learned to protect that knee before it was ever officially injured." She moved the joint through 10 more degrees. He didn't flinch, which was interesting. "How long were you having symptoms before the MRI?" Silence. "Mr. Calloway." 8 months, he said, maybe 9. She looked up then. He met her eyes, and whatever he'd expected to find there, judgment, something, he didn't find it. She just nodded and wrote it down. "Okay, that changes the rehab timeline." "Changes it how?" "Extends it. You've got compensation patterns in the hip and the lower back that develop to take load off the knee. We have to retrain all of that, not just the joint itself." She set his leg down gently, rolled back slightly on the stool. 12 weeks minimum, probably 14. "My team said 8 to 10. Your team isn't treating your hip." She stood. "The protocol is going to be 3 days a week here, at scheduled times. If you miss a session without 24-hour notice, that slot doesn't get recovered. It gets pushed to the end. If you arrive late, we work with whatever time is left. If you bring people," she glanced briefly toward the door, "they wait outside." He looked at her for a long moment. There was something working behind his eyes, not annoyance, something she didn't have a name for yet. "Does that work for you?" she asked. "Can I ask you something first?" "You can ask." "Do you know who—" "Yes," she said. "Does the protocol work for you?" He laughed then, not the performed laugh he'd come in with, something shorter, a little surprised. "Yeah," he said. "It works." "Good. Danny will schedule you out at the front desk." She picked up the chart. "You're going to want to ice tonight. 20 minutes on, 40 off. And stop sleeping with a pillow under that knee. I know it's more comfortable. It's shortening your hamstring." She was already at the door. "That's it?" he said. She turned. He was still on the table, one shoe in his hand, looking at her with an expression she would later describe to her best friend as a man who had just walked into a wall he didn't see. "That's the evaluation," she said. "First session is Thursday. Wear shorts." She left. In the parking lot, the man with the headset was on his phone. The two others were standing near an SUV that cost more than some houses in this zip code. Ryan came out, hands in his pockets, and one of them immediately moved toward him. "How'd it go? What's the plan? Should we call Hendricks?" "Cancel Hendricks," Ryan said. "The whole thing?" "Transfer everything here." He looked back at the building. The sign above the door said Morgan Sports Rehabilitation in clean sans serif letters, a hand-painted bracket logo underneath that someone had done well. "I'm here for 14 weeks. He got in the car. He didn't look back again, but the thing he was carrying when he left, he didn't have a name for it. He just knew it hadn't been there when he'd arrived. Week 1, he was early. Week 2, he brought coffee for Danny, the right order, which meant he'd asked. Week 3, he made Jade Morgan laugh. It happened in the gym. The rehab gym was at the back of the clinic, 4 treatment tables, resistance bands color-coded by tension on a pegboard, a section of turf for functional movement work, 2 large mirrors that Jade used to show patients their own compensations in real time, fluorescent lights, a speaker in the corner that played whatever Danny put on from the desk, which on Thursdays was R&B that was too slow for anyone doing actual work. Ryan had been doing single-leg balance work for 6 minutes, boring, essential, the kind of exercise that reveals exactly how much an athlete hates being a beginner again. He was doing fine. Then he reached for the water bottle on the windowsill, and the foam pad shifted under his foot, and he went down with the full conviction of a man who had not expected the ground to betray him. Not injured, just down. Both hands on the turf, one knee, the water bottle rolling under the table. He looked up at her. "Don't," he said. She pressed her lips together. "I see exactly what you're doing," he said. It came out anyway, fast, involuntary, the kind of laugh you get when you've been holding it for 7 seconds too long. She turned immediately and walked to the pegboard and made a production of reorganizing the resistance bands by color, which they were already organized by, and by the time she turned back around, her face was professional again. He was standing, retrieving the water bottle. His expression was extremely calm. He filed it away. Didn't say a word. Week 5, week 6. He started showing up knowing things. Her 10 a.m. cancelled and she'd have a 20-minute window. Danny's birthday was Thursday. The front door lock stuck in humidity. She didn't ask how he knew. He didn't explain. In week 6, he came in off something. She could tell. He was present, responsive, moved through the exercises correctly, but the energy underneath was different. Compressed, like something had been turned down but not off. She ran the session. At the end, when he was sitting on the table doing the final set of quad sets, isometric boring, just squeezing and releasing, he said, to no one in particular, "My business partner bought out my share of a company we built together, said the investor group voted on it. Didn't tell me there was a vote." He did another rep. 4 years, we started that thing in his garage. Jade was writing in the chart. She finished the note she was on. 10 more, she said. He did 10 more. She didn't look up, but she heard him exhale. Slow, deliberate, and something in the room settled, the way rooms settle when a person stops carrying something alone. She didn't tell him she was sorry. She didn't ask questions. She just let it sit there, acknowledged, in the space between them. And he left the session 3 minutes later looking like a man who'd put something down. She thought about that on the drive home, thought about it more than she should have. Week 7, Tuesday. The physical therapist from the sports medicine group 2 floors up was in the building lobby when their session ended. Dr. Steve Clark, board certified, published in 3 journals, whose opinion Jade had been carefully cultivating for 6 months, because she wanted a referral partnership with his practice. She'd had lunch with him twice, professional, strategic, slow build. Ryan came out of the elevator beside her. Clark looked up. His face did the thing faces do. Ryan Calloway. "Hey man," Ryan shook his hand. "You work in this building?" "Sports medicine, 2nd floor, you're rehabbing here. Best PT in Houston." Ryan said it with total casual confidence, gesturing at Jade like this was a fact as neutral as weather. "And she's been letting me know it every Tuesday and Thursday for 7 weeks. Jade kept her expression even. Clark looked at her, recalibrating slightly, the way people do when someone they'd categorized one way gets recategorized. "I didn't realize you 2 knew each other outside of—" "We don't," Jade said. "He's a patient." "She's very serious about that," Ryan agreed. "I'm standing right here," Jade said. "I know." He smiled at Clark. "She talks about herself in 3rd person sometimes. It's a power move." Clark laughed. Jade felt the heat start at her collarbone. "That's not what—" She stopped, looked at Clark. "He's a patient. The referral conversation we've been having, I'd love to continue it. My schedule opens up Friday afternoon if you want to grab coffee." Clark nodded, still smiling. "Friday works." Ryan said nothing. He was looking at the lobby directory on the wall with the focused attention of someone who was absolutely listening to everything. She looked at him as Clark walked toward the elevator. "Best PT in Houston," she said. "It's true." "You embarrassed me." He turned from the directory. "How?" She didn't have a precise answer. That was the problem. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't wrong. It was just so visible, so offered up, so completely without her permission. She fixed him with a look that she'd been told could stop a sentence at 20 feet. He held it comfortably. "Friday coffee with Clark sounds promising," he said. "Very professional." She walked out of the lobby. He let her go first. Then he smiled at the directory, private and brief, and followed. Week 8, Thursday. The measurements didn't lie. Jade had the goniometer on his knee, the simple hinged tool that measures joint angles, nothing more. And the numbers were wrong. Flexion down 4 degrees from where it had been 10 days ago. Swelling minimal but present. The tissue was guarding again. She ran the full assessment twice. Same result. "The timeline needs to extend," she said. He was quiet. Not the defensive quiet she'd been half expecting. The quiet of someone who had played through pain long enough to know what it sounded like when a body refused to cooperate. "How long?" he said. 2 weeks minimum. Maybe 3. It's not a failure. Sometimes tissue remodeling stalls. Your body's doing the thing it knows how to do, which is protect itself. We just have to convince it the structure is solid." He looked at his own knee for a moment. Something moved in his expression, complicated below the surface, and then it was gone. "Okay," he said. "That's it? What do you want me to say?" Most patients argue. He looked up. "Would it change the 2 weeks?" "No." "Then?" He shrugged. She made the note. But the thing she'd seen in his face, the specific quality of it, not like someone hearing bad news, more like someone hearing a familiar sound from a long way away, stayed with her through the rest of the afternoon. She didn't know what it meant yet. She filed it. Week 14. The last session. Jade had 2 other patients in the gym, a college soccer player doing lateral band walks, and a guy named Dennis who'd had rotator cuff surgery and was still deeply unhappy about everything. Danny was at the front desk, with the monitor she turned so she could see the gym, which she claimed was for safety reasons, and was actually for reasons she would never admit professionally. Ryan's session ended at 11:40. She handed him the discharge summary, 2 pages, specific home program, follow-up recommendations, the GP referral for the follow-up imaging. He took it without looking at it, which would have annoyed her, except she knew he'd actually read it later, at home probably twice. She'd learned that about him in 14 weeks. "Home program is non-negotiable for the next 6 weeks, she said. "If you skip the single leg work, the compensation patterns come back. Your hip will start loading wrong again, and you'll end up back in surgery, and it won't be my clinic next time." Threat noted. Observation. He smiled. Then he reached into the bag that had been sitting by the door since he'd arrived. She'd noticed it, hadn't asked, and pulled out a piece of poster board. It was large, white. The lettering was in black marker, block capitals, slightly uneven on the right side where he'd run out of space. Thank you for fixing my knee, and for not pretending you knew who I was. That was the best part below that, in smaller letters. The knee thing was also good. The soccer player looked up. Dennis stopped complaining for the first time in 6 weeks. Danny at the desk turned completely away and appeared to be reviewing invoices. Jade looked at the sign, then at him. He was holding it with both hands, straight, at chest height, completely serious. No performance in it, that was the thing. He wasn't doing a bit, he meant the poster board. She felt the heat hit her face all at once. "You're serious," she said. "You fixed my knee," he said. Seemed like a Cartaz situation. What? Cartaz. Sign. I looked it up. A pause. I wanted to get the word right. She stared at him. Her face was hot. The soccer player was fully watching now, not even pretending. "You looked up the Portuguese word for sign," she said carefully. "So you told Danny to order your lunch in Portuguese that one time, and Look, it's not a big deal." It was absolutely a big deal. She had no idea what to do with that. "Put it down," she said. "Are you going to keep it?" "I'm going to put it in the recycling. That's still keeping it in the building." He set it face up against the wall. Close enough. She picked up the discharge summary from where he'd set it and handed it back to him. "Read this. Do the program. Call your GP about the imaging." "Okay. I mean it about the single leg work." "I know." She nodded once and turned back toward Dennis, who was pretending he hadn't watched any of it. She got 3 steps. "Jade." She turned. He had his bag over his shoulder. Discharge summary in hand, standing in the gym doorway where 14 weeks ago he'd walked in and looked at her like a man waiting to be known. "Can I get your number?" he said, "in case the knee acts up." The soccer player made a very small sound. Jade looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. No smile, just steady, direct, asking. She walked to the front desk, wrote her number on a clinic card, and walked back and handed it to him. "If you call me about anything other than the knee," she said, "I'll refer you to someone in Galveston." He took the card. "Understood." She went back to Dennis. Behind her, she heard the gym door open and close. Danny appeared in the doorway approximately 6 seconds later, with the expression of someone about to say something. "Don't," Jade said. Danny went back to the desk. The poster board stayed against the wall for the rest of the afternoon. Jade told herself she'd deal with it at closing. She didn't deal with it at closing. It was still there on Monday. She'd already decided she was leaving at 8. The dinner was fine. Priya had picked a good spot. The tacos were real. The margaritas were strong enough that 2 of the residents were already loud. Jade liked these people. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that it was her birthday, which meant at some point someone was going to make it about that. And she'd specifically said, "Let's just do dinner specifically to avoid that." And the day had already been the kind of day she didn't have words for yet. Not catastrophic. Just the kind where everything costs a little more than it should. Her 8 a.m. had cried. Post-op, scared, 22 years old, and looking at Jade like she had answers. Her landlord had called about the pipe situation she'd been ignoring, and somewhere around 3 in the afternoon she'd sat in the supply closet for 4 minutes and breathed through her nose and gone back out. 8 o'clock. She'd stay until 8, be home by 9, do the thing where she sat on the couch and watched something she'd already seen. It was 7:43 when the door opened. She heard Priya make a sound before she turned around. He was holding a cake, not a bakery cake, the kind from a grocery store that someone had then written on in blue icing, slightly uneven. The candle in the center was shaped like a star. When Priya lit it, it began playing a tinny version of a song Jade couldn't immediately identify because her brain had briefly stopped processing. 6 people at the table, every single one of them with a phone out inside of 30 seconds. "Happy birthday," Ryan said, like this was a normal thing that was happening. Jade looked at the cake, then at him. "I told you I didn't want..." The cake doesn't know that. Ryan, she hates this, he told the table cheerfully. This is exactly what she asked me not to do. Then why? Because you've been here for 45 minutes and you've checked your phone 3 times and you were about to leave. He set the cake down in front of her. You're welcome. The candle was still playing the song. It turned out to be a slowed-down version of Happy Birthday that had a kind of funeral quality up close. She blew it out. The table cheered. Someone got a video of her face in the exact moment before she did, which she knew because she heard the shutter sound. She was going to have to deal with that later. She lasted until 9:15, which was longer than she'd planned, and she knew exactly why. The parking lot was half empty. Orange sodium lights, a grocery cart someone had abandoned near the curb. She was looking for her keys when she heard him behind her. You good? I'm fine. Okay. She found the keys. Didn't unlock the car yet. The night was warm the way Houston nights are in late spring. Thick, a little close. The smell of someone's AC unit running somewhere nearby. She started laughing. Not at anything specific, just the candle, the song. The way Priya had filmed the whole thing with her phone held sideways for better resolution. It came up from somewhere low, and she laughed until her eyes watered, standing next to her car in the parking lot, keys in her hand. Ryan was leaning against the car beside hers, arms crossed, not laughing, not. Just watching her with an expression she didn't have language for, patient and specific and something else underneath. She wound down, wiped her eyes, looked at him. That song, she said. The candle was on clearance. It sounded like a dirge. It was the last star-shaped one. She shook her head. He was still looking at her the same way. There she is, he said. Quiet. Not a joke. She stopped. The parking lot did its parking lot thing. A car somewhere, the grocery cart shifting in a barely there breeze. She looked at him, and he looked back, and she felt for a second the specific discomfort of being seen without having agreed to it. How do you always know, she said. It came out before she'd decided to say it. He was quiet for a moment. Know what? When to show up. She wasn't looking at him now. The day was... it was a lot. And I was going to leave, and you showed up with a clearance candle, and I stayed another hour and a half, and I don't... She stopped. How? He looked at the ground for a second. When he looked up, his voice was different, not the voice he used when he was being funny. I just pay attention, he said. To you. I have been since week 3. Silence. That's... She started, stopped. Yeah, he said. I know. She unlocked the car, got in, drove home thinking about 4 words and 1 sentence, and the way he'd said, yeah, I know, like he'd been waiting to say it for a while and hadn't meant to say it now. The ceiling in her bedroom was the same as always. She lay there and the sentence went around and around. I just pay attention to you. And she told herself it was nothing. It was just Ryan being Ryan. It meant exactly what it meant and nothing more, and she believed that completely. She looked at the clock. 12:47. She'd been home for 2 hours. The call came at 7:18. Her mother's doctor. The results from the follow-up imaging. The one they'd scheduled 3 weeks ago. The one that was supposed to confirm the treatment was working. It wasn't confirming that. We'd like to bring her in for additional scans. Sooner rather than later. She said okay. She wrote down the date. She thanked him, which was an interesting thing to do. And she hung up and stood in her kitchen for a moment with the phone in her hand. Then she picked up her bag and drove to work. The 8 a.m. was a college track athlete. Tibial stress fracture, 4 weeks in a boot, starting the return to run protocol today. Jade walked him through the process. Bone stress injuries heal in stages. The imaging looks clean, but the tissue needs progressive load to remodel properly. We start with walk-jog intervals on the treadmill, and we don't negotiate with pain. She used the word remodel and thought about her mother's scan and moved on. The 10 a.m. The 11:30. Lunch she ate standing up at the supply counter, half a sandwich, looking at the afternoon schedule. She was fine. She had been fine all day. She was going to keep being fine because there was nothing else available right now, and the clinic had 4 more patients before 5 o'clock, and her mother had beaten harder things than this before, and she was going to keep moving until she got home and could sit with it properly. That was the plan. He knocked at the back door at 4:07. Nobody knocked at the back door. It was the staff entrance off the alley, the one she used when she arrived early and didn't want to walk through the waiting room. She opened it because she thought it was the supply delivery. Ryan. Jeans. No jacket. A paper bag from the Thai place on Westheimer in one hand, his phone in the other. "Hey," he said. "How did you—" "Danny." He held up the bag. "You mentioned this place once, like 4 months ago. You said the Pad CU was better than it had any right to be." She stared at him. "I was in the area," he said, which was almost certainly not true. "And I have a video that I promise is the funniest thing you'll see this week." She should have said she was busy. She had a 4:30. She stepped back from the door. They sat on the 2 chairs in the back office, her desk, the filing cabinet, the small window that looked onto the alley. He pulled up the video. A golden retriever trying to fit an enormous stick through a narrow door, completely committed, completely unwilling to reconsider the angle for 45 seconds. She laughed before she could stop it, and then she was crying. Not dramatic, no warning, no build. Just her eyes went and then her face, and she pressed her fingers against her mouth, and it didn't help. The kind that comes up from somewhere you didn't know was full. She heard him go still. She got a breath. "Don't say anything." Wasn't going to. He didn't move toward her, didn't put a hand on her shoulder, didn't say hey in that soft voice people use when they're trying to manage someone else's feeling for them. He just stayed in the chair beside her, paper bag on the desk between them, while she got through it. 30 seconds, maybe 40. When she looked up, he was looking at the window, giving her the room even while he was in it. She wiped her face, fixed her breath. "My mom," she said. Not an explanation, just placing it somewhere outside herself. He nodded once. Didn't ask. She'd taken 3 years off before PT school. Everyone in her program had been 22, 23, fresh from undergrad, with their whole timelines intact. She'd been 26, starting over, the debt restructured, the detour already behind her. She'd never said out loud that she minded. She didn't let herself mind. And then a phone call at 7:18 in the morning, and suddenly she minded. She didn't say any of that. He didn't ask for it. They sat there until her 4:30 showed up at the front, and Danny's knock came through the wall. She stood, straightened her jacket, picked up the Pad CU. "Thank you," she said. "It's just food." She looked at him. He looked back, easy and direct, the way he always did. She went back out to work. That night Priya texted at 9, "You seemed off today, you good?" Jade typed, "I'm fine, just tired." Sent it, put the phone face down. She sat with the difference between those 2 conversations. Priya, who loved her, who'd known her for 6 years, who'd asked exactly the right question, and Ryan, who'd knocked on a door she didn't know he knew about, sat in a chair and stayed quiet. She'd told Priya she was fine. She hadn't said anything to Ryan at all. And somehow that one was the truth. She didn't know what to do with someone who got there before she asked, who didn't need her to perform okay, who just stayed. That was the problem. She knew that now. She just didn't know what to do with knowing it. She almost didn't mention Andrew at all. It came out sideways. Priya asking about the weekend, Jade saying she had plans, Priya asking what kind, and Jade saying just dinner in a tone that apparently meant something, because Priya's eyebrows moved and she said with who, and Jade said someone I've been seeing, and that was when she felt it. Not a sound, not a word. Just Ryan 2 seats down reaching for his drink at a slightly different moment than the conversation called for. Nobody else noticed. The table kept moving. Andrew, who worked in sports law and had opinions about everything, was already pivoting to something about the Texans. Priya was smiling at Jade with the specific smile that meant we're talking about this later. Ryan laughed at something Andrew said. Completely normal, completely present. She watched the side of his face for the rest of the sentence and couldn't find anything. That was the thing. She couldn't find anything, and she'd spent 2 years learning what his nothing looked like, and this was different from his nothing. This was something wearing his nothing's clothes. She looked back at Priya and smiled and changed the subject. Midway through the night, Andrew's girlfriend leaned over. Dana, long time. The kind of easy presence that came from a decade of being the person someone chose. She was refilling her glass, and she said to Jade, low and without particular weight, "He's different when you're around, you know." Jade looked up. "Who?" Dana tilted her head slightly toward Ryan, who was across the table demonstrating something about a football route to Andrew using the salt and pepper shakers. "Less performing, more just... there." She shrugged. "Andrew noticed it a while ago. I just figured someone should say it." She topped off Jade's wine and turned back to the table. Jade sat with that for the rest of the night. Less performing, more just there. She watched him from across the table and understood, with the specific discomfort of someone who has been carefully not knowing something, that Dana was right. She had a data set. 2 years of Ryan Calloway in various rooms, and the version of him in this room, in any room she was in, was quieter in some way she hadn't let herself measure before. She didn't know what to do with that measurement. Andrew was outside calling someone when she came out at 11:15. Ryan was a few feet down the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, waiting on his car. And then a silver Audi pulled up, and David got out. He was fine. David was a good person. She knew that, 3 months of evidence. He kissed her cheek and asked how the night was, and she felt, standing on that sidewalk, the specific wrongness of 2 contexts that had no business being in the same place. She looked at Ryan. Ryan was looking at David with the perfectly calibrated expression of someone who was not looking at David with any particular feeling whatsoever. He introduced himself. Name, handshake, 30 seconds. Nothing to find. David said something polite. Ryan smiled. She watched it happen like it was behind glass. David went to pull the car around to wait. Ryan looked back at her. 30 seconds, maybe. The street doing its street thing around them. "Is he good to you?" Low. Not a setup. The question of someone who'd been holding it for a while. She didn't answer fast enough. "That's not your question to ask." "I know." He held her eyes. "Is he?" She looked at him. He looked back. Behind him a cab went through a yellow light, and the sound of the city kept happening, and none of it touched the 30 feet of sidewalk they were standing on. "Ryan, you don't have to answer." Still steady. "I just needed to ask." His car came. He said good night. Not different. Not waited, just good night. And got in. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment after the taillights went, David's voice behind her. "Ready?" "Yeah," she said. "Let's go." The following Thursday she ended it with David. Coffee shop on Montrose, 11 in the morning. He was decent about it. She drove back to the clinic and saw 3 patients and didn't examine why she'd done it. Because she already knew, and knowing it was enough of a problem without looking directly at it. She didn't tell Ryan. He didn't ask. She saw his car in the lot before she saw him. Black Range Rover, 3rd space from the entrance. She stopped walking for exactly 1 second, then kept going. Inside, the private room was already half full. The kind of venue that had real linen and candles that weren't in glass jars, and a sommelier who materialized without being called. Priya was at the head of the table, looking like someone who had waited her whole life for this specific Thursday, and was correct to have done so. The Nuevo, Tai, stood when he saw Jade, and hugged her with the warmth of a man who understood that his future wife's best friend needed to be treated well. Ryan was beside him. Dark jacket, no tie, the particular ease of someone who dressed exactly right without appearing to have thought about it. He looked up when she came in. She was wearing a dress, emerald green, clean lines. Nothing like the scrubs and the blazers and the clinical navy of every professional context he'd ever seen her in. He registered it in about half a second. His eyes went back to her face and stayed there. She looked away first and went to hug Priya. Dinner moved the way good dinners move. Wine poured, courses arriving, the table finding its rhythm. Ryan was across from her and 4 seats down, which was far enough for plausible deniability, and close enough that she could hear him clearly when the table got loud. He was funny. He was always funny, she knew that. But in this room with these people he was comfortable in a way that registered differently. She watched him make Tay's uncle laugh until the man had to set down his glass. Watched him ask Priya something about the ceremony, and actually listened to the answer. Less performing, more just there. Dana's words from 3 weeks ago, in her head, uninvited. She reached for her wine. Under the table, her knee and his knee were 2 inches apart. Had been, she realized, for the last 20 minutes. The table was long, but the seating was close, and at some point in the first course the geometry had become what it was. Then his knee shifted. Small, just weight redistribution, completely unremarkable, and it touched hers. Neither of them moved. The conversation above the table continued. Tay's sister was explaining something about the rehearsal order. Priya was laughing. Jade picked up her wineglass with a steady hand, and the contact under the table lasted for the rest of the course, and neither of them acknowledged it in any direction. The story came out somewhere between the 3rd and 4th course. Tay had asked Ryan how he and Jade knew each other, the clean version for the benefit of the family members at the table. Ryan gave it. The clinic, the rehab, the 12 weeks. And then he paused, and something in his expression shifted, and he said, "There was this one afternoon, maybe week 9, I think. I came in early and the door to the gym was open. She didn't know I was there." He was talking to Tay, nominally, but the table had gone slightly more attentive, the way tables do. She was working with a kid, maybe 19, 20. College athlete, bad injury, clearly terrified he wasn't going to come back from it. And I watched her spend 12 minutes with him, not the protocol, just sitting on the bench next to him, talking, not like a therapist, like someone who knew what it cost to rebuild something you thought was gone. He picked up his glass. I don't know if she ever told him it was going to be okay. But he walked out of there standing different. The table looked at Jade. She felt the heat arrive at her face all at once, complete, no warning. She had known that kid, Marcus Tran, tibial stress fracture, 20 years old, and 3 weeks from losing his scholarship if he didn't return to full training. She had sat with him on the bench. She had not known Ryan was there. He transferred to a different program 6 months later, she said, because she needed to say something. Division Y, full ride. I know, Ryan said. I looked him up. The table made a warm sound. Priya was looking at Jade with an expression that Jade was going to have to address later. She looked down at her plate, and the heat in her face did not go anywhere. Tay's cousin, late 20s, visiting from Atlanta, who'd spent most of dinner being cheerfully loud, leaned across toward Ryan during dessert. Okay, I have to ask, he said. You two together. The table went 1 degree quieter. Ryan didn't hesitate, didn't deflect, didn't joke, didn't do the thing people do when they need a second to figure out how to answer. He just looked at Jade, across the candles, across the plates, direct, and said, not yet. 2 words, completely calm, like it was a scheduling matter rather than a declaration. Tay's cousin nodded, like that was a satisfying answer, and reached for his wine. Jade looked at Ryan. He looked back. No smile. Just the steady directness she'd spent 2 years cataloguing and still didn't have the right folder for. She looked away. Not yet. He found her by the valet stand at the end of the night. You hate when I do that, he said. I hate when you do that. You always laugh anyway. He said it without the grin, which was somehow worse. Good night, Ryan. Good night. He didn't follow. She got in the Uber and the driver pulled out and she looked out the window at Houston moving past. The lights on Westheimer, the overpass, the city doing what cities do at 11 on a Thursday. And she tried to locate the part of herself that had a rational response to not yet. She couldn't find it. Not yet meant a timeline. Not yet meant he'd thought about the answer before tonight. And the answer was that directional. Not yet meant that he had looked at her across a table full of people who were watching and hadn't flinched. She watched the city and didn't find what she was looking for, which was a reason that it shouldn't matter. She couldn't find that either. The ceremony was beautiful, and she cried once, briefly, when Priya said the vows she'd helped her write 3 months ago in a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning. Nobody saw she had a system. The reception was loud and warm and full of people who were genuinely happy, which was rarer than it should be at weddings. She did her madrina duties, the toast, the coordination, the cheerful management of Ty's aunt, who had strong opinions about the seating chart, She was good at this. She moved through the room like someone who knew exactly what she was there to do. Ryan was on the other side of the room being exactly himself. She tracked him without tracking him, the way you track weather peripherally, not staring at the sky, but knowing where the clouds are. She was fine. She was completely, entirely fine, and the night was going well and the champagne was good, and she was talking to one of Tay's colleagues, someone who worked in sports broadcasting. Pleasant, clearly interested, asking good questions about the clinic, when the music shifted. Slower. The DJ doing the thing DJs do when the night has reached a certain temperature. She heard it and kept talking, and then Ryan was there. He didn't say "excuse me" to the other guy, he didn't say anything, just stood at the edge of their conversation and looked at her with his hand slightly extended. Not reaching, just available. She went with him. She didn't decide. Her body made the decision before the thought formed, and she was on the dance floor before she'd processed leaving the conversation. And when she registered what had just happened, it was already done. He held her like someone who had thought about it, not tight, not performative, one hand at her back, the other holding hers, and the distance between them was close enough that she could smell his jacket, cedar, something clean, and feel the warmth off his shoulder. He didn't say anything. That was the thing. After 2 years of him filling every available silence, he had nothing, or he had something and was choosing not to use it. She couldn't tell which, and not being able to tell was its own kind of information. The song was something she half recognized. Slow, guitar forward, the kind that venues play when they want people to stop thinking. She stopped thinking, her head inclined slightly, not on his shoulder, not quite, just tilting in that direction, the body taking small liberties it wouldn't announce. And her eyes closed. 2 seconds, maybe 3. She felt him notice. Not movement, stillness, the specific quality of someone becoming very careful. She opened her eyes. He was looking at her, not smiling, not the expression he used when he was about to say something, just present. Looking at her like she was something he'd been trying to see clearly for a long time, and was finally standing still enough. She didn't look away. And that was when she knew. Not a suspicion. Not the careful half-thought she'd been carrying for months, the one she kept not finishing. A clear, complete declarative fact, arriving without drama in the middle of a song on a Saturday night. She was in love with him. Had been. Couldn't identify the exact week anymore, which meant it had been long enough to blur. Long enough that it had been there while she was telling herself other stories about what she was doing and why. She kept dancing. He didn't know what had just happened inside her. She wasn't going to tell him yet. Not here, not mid-song, not while she was still getting used to the shape of it. She just let it exist, new and solid and heavier than she'd expected, and moved with him in the low light while the song did what it was doing. His thumb moved once against her back, small, barely there. She felt it everywhere. The song ended. They separated, natural, no ceremony, and walked back toward the tables from opposite angles, the way people do when they don't want to arrive together. She sat down, reached for her champagne. The glass was cold and she held it for a second without drinking. Across the table, Priya caught her eye. Priya's expression said nothing and everything, the way faces do when a person has been waiting a long time to see something and has finally seen it. She turned back to Tay and didn't push. Jade drank the champagne. She was going back to her seat. Ryan was somewhere behind her, coming through the crowd, and in a few minutes he was going to sit at this table and be next to her the way he always was, present and specific and completely without the armor she'd spent 2 years wishing he'd put on. She knew now what she was carrying into the rest of the night. She just had to figure out what to do with it. He sat down next to her without asking. The seating at this point in the night was fluid. People had migrated, chairs had moved. The careful arrangement of the dinner had dissolved into the warm chaos of a reception that was going well. There was a reasonable explanation for him being there. She knew it wasn't the explanation. She poured champagne into her glass and didn't comment. It was Andrew, Tay's friend from law school, the one with opinions about everything, who asked how they'd met, directed at both of them, curious the way people get curious late in a reception when the alcohol has made everyone more direct. Ryan answered. He gave the clean version first, the clinic, the ACL, the 12 weeks. The table listened with the mild interest people give to origin stories, and then he paused. The way she'd learned meant he was deciding something, and kept going. "What I didn't expect," he said, and his voice had the tone of someone telling the truth out loud for maybe the first time, was that she was the first person in 6 years who was genuinely unimpressed with me. Not performing unimpressed, actually just indifferent to the parts of me I'd been leading with my whole career. The table smiled. Someone made a sound of recognition. But here's the thing about Jade. He wasn't looking at her. He was talking to the table, easy, conversational, the voice of someone recounting a fact. "She cries at nature documentaries, the ones about migration, birds, whales, whatever. She mentioned it once completely offhand, like it was nothing. But it's not nothing. It's the same person who will sit with a terrified 20-year-old athlete and not tell him it's going to be fine, because she doesn't make promises she can't back up. She just stays until the fear gets smaller. Same person." He picked up his glass. Took me a while to understand that those two things were connected. The table made the warm sound tables make when something true gets said out loud. Jade wasn't making any sound. She was looking at her champagne glass, and her face felt like it had a temperature. Not embarrassment, something more exposed than that. He hadn't said anything she could argue with. He hadn't said anything she'd told him directly. She'd mentioned the documentaries once, 8 months ago offhand, half attention because she'd been tired and her guard had been 3 inches lower than usual, and she hadn't thought anyone was filing it. He had been filing it. She didn't know what else he had. How many moments she'd thought were incidental that he'd been keeping. The thought arrived and kept arriving. "She's going to kill me later," Ryan said pleasantly to the table, which laughed. She looked up at him. He was already looking at her. Not smiling now, just the way he'd been on the dance floor. That careful, direct attention that had nowhere to hide and wasn't trying to. She didn't know which one of them moved. It didn't matter. The distance closed and he kissed her, not soft, not asking, the kind of kiss that had 2 years of patience behind it and had run out of reasons to wait. His hand came up to her jaw, and the noise of the salon kept happening around them like weather, and she kissed him back because she'd known since a song 40 minutes ago that she was going to. The table went very quiet. She pulled back first, stood up, not with a word, not with a look, just up, chair back, moving and through the salon toward the exit, because she needed air and walls that weren't full of people who had just watched that happen. Outside, the air was warm and thick, Houston in the evening, the venue lit up behind her, and the city a low glow on the horizon. 2 convidados she didn't know were near the entrance with drinks, a third on the phone. She walked past them to the far end of the terrace, not totally private enough. She stood there. The door opened behind her. Priya, not Ryan. Priya, who crossed to her in 5 steps, said nothing, and just looked at her the way she'd been looking at her all night. The look that said, "I've been watching this for 2 years and I'm not going to say I told you so, but I need you to know that I know." Jade looked back. Priya squeezed her arm once, quick, firm, and went back inside. 10 seconds total. It was enough. She was still standing there when he came out. He stopped a few feet away. The 2 convidados near the entrance had gone back inside. The phone call had ended. It was just the 2 of them and the city, and the sound of the reception muffled through the glass. He didn't say anything. Neither did she. The venue lights threw long shadows across the terrace, and somewhere inside the music was still going, and they stood there in the space between what had just happened and whatever was coming next. She spoke first. Not immediately. There was a duration to the silence before she broke it, long enough that the city had time to exist around them, the low hum of Houston at night, a car somewhere on the street below, the muffled bass of a song playing inside that neither of them was listening to. "I terminated it with David the week after you asked if he was good to me," she said. "I didn't examine why. I already knew why, and knowing it was enough of a problem." He was still, listening the way he listened, not waiting for a pause to speak, actually taking it in. "I have managed what I feel about you for almost 2 years, she said. "I want you to understand what that cost. Not as a complaint, just that you should know it was not nothing." "I know. And I'm not I came out here because I needed 30 seconds, not because I was done. Something in him settled. She saw it, a thing that had been held releasing. Okay, he said, quietly. She looked at him for a moment. Then, can I ask you something? Yeah. The knee. His expression shifted, not closing, something more careful than that. Week 8, she said. When I told you the timeline was extending, you went somewhere, not frustration, somewhere else, something that recognized the news. She kept her voice even. The compensation patterns I found on day 1 were months old. The mechanism of injury in your MRI doesn't happen in a single play. Someone gave you a report before that season, and you played anyway. He looked at her for a long time. Yeah, he said. How long before? 8 months, team physician, grade 2 partial early tissue degeneration. He exhaled slowly. He recommended modified activity, 6 weeks of staged rest. And you asked him to keep it out of the official record. I asked him to keep it out of the official record. She waited. We were 3 games out from the playoffs, he said. I'd been building to that season for 4 years. I thought I knew my body better than a report. I thought I could manage it. The word landed wrong, and he heard it. I know how that sounds coming from me to you. It sounds like someone who'd never had a ceiling before finding out he had one, she said, and not being able to accept it. He nodded. Once. Like she'd named something he'd been trying to name for 3 years. Everyone thinks it was bad luck, and he said. The injury, the retirement, my family, my agent, the guys I played with for 8 years. I let it be the story because... He stopped. Because. He was quiet for a moment. When he looked at her, there was something in it she hadn't seen before. Not the directness. That was always there, the exposure underneath it. Because you were the exception, he said, from the beginning. You looked at that knee on day 1, and you already knew something was off. And I sat there and thought, if I tell her, she's going to look at me different. Not the athlete, not the guy with the successful career and the retirement and the clean story. Just a man who was given a clear warning and threw it away because he thought he was too good to have limits. A beat. I didn't want to be that to you. The city kept doing what it was doing. She stayed with that. I didn't want you to look at me the way I knew you'd look at a patient who did that, he said. Clinical, like a decision you're accounting for in the treatment plan. I wanted... He stopped again. The honesty was costing something and he was paying it anyway. I wanted to be the thing you hadn't categorized yet. She looked at him. He was standing the way people stand when they've said the true thing and don't know what comes next. Not braced exactly, just present, whatever the answer was. She was quiet for long enough that she felt him start to recalibrate. The shift was subtle, a degree of stillness that wasn't the same as the stillness before, something beginning to close. Don't, she said. He stopped. You've been carrying that alone for 3 years. Yeah. That's done now. He looked at her. She looked back. The venue lights threw the same long shadows they'd been throwing, and somewhere inside Priya was probably dancing with her husband, and the night was doing what nights do, and none of it was the point. She closed the distance between them and put her hand against his face. Not kissing him, just her palm on his jaw, the warmth of his skin, the realness of another person after 2 years of managing the distance between them down to the millimeter. His eyes closed. She felt him exhale. I should have caught it, she said, quiet. If I'd been there before the season, you weren't. I know, Jade. He turned his face slightly into her hand. Not dramatic, just leaning into it. The way you lean into something you've been a long way from. I'm not looking for absolution. I just needed someone to know. I know, she said. I'm the someone. His hand came up and covered hers against his jaw. They stayed like that for a moment. No next move, no agenda. Just the two of them on a terrace in Houston, with 3 years of his secret and 2 years of hers, finally in the same place at the same time. Then she took his hand, and they went back inside. Priya saw them come through the door together. She was at the table with Tay. his arm around her shoulders, and she looked up at exactly the right moment. Jade and Ryan crossing the threshold, not holding hands anymore but close, the particular quality of two people who have just put something down and don't need to announce it. Priya's eyes went to Jade's. Jade gave her the smallest nod. Priya turned back to Tay and cried, quiet, fast. The kind you get when something you've been waiting on for a long time finally arrives. And when Tay asked what was wrong, she just shook her head and said nothing. It's nothing, which was the most inaccurate thing said all night. She saw him before he saw her. The last thing she'd done before leaving was check her phone. Her mother's doctor had called that morning with the follow-up results. Not resolved, but better. The kind of better that doesn't come with a celebration, just a quiet exhale and a date for the next scan, penciled into a calendar you try not to look at too often. She'd stood in the supply room for a moment with that, and then she'd turned off the lights and walked out. The door hadn't fully closed behind her. She was still half in the threshold, one hand on the frame. Keys in the other, and there he was, not at the entrance. A little down the block where the streetlight hit the sidewalk in a way that was slightly warmer than the rest, leaning against the post he'd parked near the 2 times he'd stopped by without calling ahead. Jeans, a grey t-shirt, hands in his pockets, no cartaz, no bag with food from a place she'd mentioned once, no phone with a video already pulled up. Just him on the sidewalk, weight shifted slightly back like someone who had been standing in one place long enough to get comfortable with the possibility that this might not go the way he wanted. She stood in the doorway for a second. Then she let the door close behind her and walked toward him. He looked up when she was about 10 feet away. Hey. Hey. She stopped in front of him. You're early. You're late. It's 6:32. I've been here since 6:15. She looked at him. He looked back. Not the performance of calm, the actual thing. A man who'd decided something and was standing in it. I was trying to be quiet for once, he said. No thing, no setup, just... He gestured at himself vaguely. This. How's that going? Terrible. I have 7 things to say and I've been standing here deciding which one starts. She shifted her bag on her shoulder. The block was doing its early evening thing. Someone walking a dog on the far end. A car passing. The neighborhood settling into the hour between work and dinner. Normal. All of it completely normal except for the thing that was happening in the middle of it. Say one, she said. He looked at her for a moment. Week 3, he said. Of the rehab, you told me to stay off the knee for 48 hours, and when I asked why you explained it like I was a person who could understand a medical reason and not someone who needed it simplified. Nobody had talked to me like that in... He stopped. I'd been in locker rooms and press rooms and sponsor events for 6 years, and everyone talked to me like I was the name. You talked to me like I was the knee, and I know that sounds like a low bar. It sounds like a low bar, she agreed. It was the best thing anyone had done for me in 6 years. He said it straight, no performance in it. I've been in since then, that's the first one. She didn't say anything. Second one, he said, I want to be yours, officially, with full transparency that I'm going to keep showing up with things you didn't ask for and saying true things about you in front of people you respect and being completely, categorically too much in every room we're ever in together. A beat. That's the pitch. That's a terrible pitch. I know. You're leading with the warning label. I figured you'd appreciate the disclosure. She looked at him. He held it, steady, not pushing, just there. The version of him she'd seen on the dance floor and on the terrace and in the back office of the clinic on a Thursday afternoon. The one that didn't need the room to be ready for him. Is it working? He said. She thought about 2 years of telling herself a very specific story. She thought about a poster board with a Portuguese word on it and a golden retriever and a clearance birthday candle that played something dirge adjacent. She thought about 30 seconds on a sidewalk and a hand at her jaw and the specific quality of a man going still when she closed her eyes. She leaned forward and kissed him. Her hands went to his face, both of them. The way you hold something you've been careful with for a long time and are finally just holding. The kiss was unhurried, the kind that happens when the waiting is over and there's nowhere else to be. When she pulled back, he was quiet, actually quiet. She'd never seen it before. 2 years, every available silence filled, and now nothing. His hands were at her waist, and he was just looking at her with the expression of someone who had arrived somewhere they'd been trying to get to for a long time and wasn't ready to move yet. "The other 5 can wait," she said. He laughed. The real one. The one from the gym floor, from the parking lot, from every room they'd ever been in together. "Yeah," he said. "They can." They walked. No destination. Just the block, then the next one. Houston doing its Houston thing around them. The evening was warm the way Houston evenings are in early summer, the air close and a little sweet from somewhere, the sky going orange-pink at the edges where the buildings didn't block it. Half a block of quiet. "You're not going to ask about the other 5, he said. "No." "Why not?" "Because I already know." He looked at her sideways. "You know." "I've always known." He faced forward. Something moved in his expression. Private, settled, the look of a man who has been seen clearly and found out it wasn't as dangerous as he'd built it up to be. "There she is," he said quietly. Not for anyone else. She didn't answer. But her hand found his between them, fingers sliding into place without announcement, without ceremony. The way things fit when they've been waiting long enough to know exactly where they go. They kept walking. The city kept being the city. The evening kept doing what evenings do, and the two of them moved through it together unhurried, with nowhere they needed to be except exactly where they were. 6 months. She found out about the interview by accident. One of her patients, college linebacker, 2 weeks into ACL rehab, the kind of 20-year-old who had a sports news app with notifications on for everything, looked up from his phone during a rest interval and said, "Hey, isn't that your boyfriend?" She looked at the screen. Ryan. A studio set, the kind with good lighting and a desk and 2 hosts who were clearly delighted to have him. The Chiron at the bottom said, "Ryan Calloway, former NFL WR, founder, Calloway Sports Health Initiative." The hosts were asking about the foundation, the hospital partnerships, the new youth program launching in the spring. Then one of them, the woman, leaning forward with the specific warmth of someone who'd done their research, said, "There's a story going around that the whole initiative started because of a physical therapist. That true?" Ryan smiled. The real one, not the one he used for rooms. "Yeah," he said. "She fixed my knee and then she kind of fixed everything else. Are you still in touch?" He laughed. "She's going to hear this and be furious that I said it on television. So that's a yes. That's a yes." Jade handed her patient the resistance band for his next set. "Keep your hips level," she said. He was at the apartment when she got home. He had a key, had for 3 months since the Tuesday she'd left it on the counter while he was there, and neither of them had made it a conversation. Just a fact, the way most things between them became facts without requiring a formal announcement. She'd come home to find he'd fixed the cabinet hinge she'd been ignoring since August. He'd left a note on the counter. Don't say it wasn't a big deal. It was making that sound. She'd kept the note. It was in the kitchen drawer with the takeout menus and the extra batteries. He was on the couch when she came in, laptop open on a call that he wrapped up in 30 seconds when he heard the door. "Hey. Hey." She dropped her bag. "I saw the interview." He had the expression of someone who'd been wondering when that was coming. "Which part?" "The part where you told 2 million people that I fixed everything. I said you fixed everything else. Accurate." Ryan. "Jade." She sat down next to him on the couch. He shifted to make room without being asked, the automatic choreography of 2 people who had learned each other's geometry. His arm went around her shoulders, and she settled into it with the ease of something practiced, something that had stopped requiring thought. "It was a good interview," she said. "I know. The foundation work is real. You should talk about it. I know. You didn't have to bring me into it." He looked at her sideways. "You are into it. You've been consulting on the rehab protocols for the youth program for 2 months. Professionally. Right." He said it with the tone that meant he was not going to argue with her framing, but also was not going to pretend he agreed with it. She'd learned to recognize that tone somewhere in the first 2 months of being friends. She'd stopped being annoyed by it sometime after that. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Outside, Houston was being Houston, the low, continuous hum of a city that didn't have an off switch. The occasional car, the neighbor's dog that barked at 6 p.m. every day with the reliability of a scheduled notification. The apartment was warm, The lamp in the corner was on because he always turned it on when he got there before her, which she'd noticed and not mentioned for 3 months. Priya called and she said, "What did she want?" "To tell me she saw the interview." She cried again. That woman cries at everything. She cried at a commercial last week, and which one? The one with the dog. That commercial is designed to make people cry. That's what I said. He laughed. Quiet, the one she'd catalogued first and collected since. His hand moved against her shoulder. Slow, the absent-minded warmth of someone who touched her because she was there, and he wanted to. She closed her eyes. This was the thing she hadn't known to want. Not the grand version, not the declaration on a terrace, not the beho on the sidewalk that had finally arrived after 2 years of managing its absence. Those had been necessary, and she didn't regret a second of how they'd arrived. But this, the lamp on when she got home, the cabinet hinge, the couch and his arm and the city outside doing its indifferent thing while they existed in the middle of it, this was the part that got her. Every time. The ordinary weight of it. She'd spent 2 years deciding that the territory between them was dangerous. She hadn't been wrong exactly. It had cost something to cross it, 2 years of herself carefully managed, and then one night when she'd stopped managing and let it be what it was. It had been worth every bit of the cost. "I have 7 patients tomorrow," she said. "I know. You have the college soccer team assessment at 8. She opened her eyes. "How do you know that?" "You mentioned it Sunday." "I mentioned it in passing. I was paying attention." He said it simply, no weight on it. Just true. The way it had always been, she understood now. He'd been paying attention since week 3, since a Tuesday morning when she'd talked to him like a person and not a name, and he'd just never stopped. She turned her head and looked at him. He was already looking at her. Not the audience-ready version, not the interview smile, just his face in the lamplight, with the expression she'd spent 2 years not letting herself name, and now saw every day. "What?" he said. "Nothing. You have the look." "I don't have a look." "You have a look. It's the one you get right before you say something you've been thinking about for a while." She was quiet for a second. "I was going to say I'm glad I gave you my number," she said. "That first time, when I told you to only call about the knee." He smiled, slow starting in his eyes. "I called you about the knee. You called me about a Texans game the first week. My knee was stressed about the Texans game." "That's not—" She stopped, shook her head. "That's not how knees work. You're the expert." She looked at him. He looked back with the particular patience of a man who had waited 2 years and now had exactly what he'd been waiting for and was not in any hurry to be anywhere else. "There she is," he said, quietly. She didn't stop smiling this time. She leaned forward and kissed him, easy, unhurried, the kind that had stopped needing a reason and had become its own reason. His hand came up to her face the way it always did now, like it knew the way. Outside the city kept going. The lamp stayed on. Neither of them moved for a long time.